The most common example that's talked about now is the near-death experience, where you have many people who seem to be clinically dead, a few people who've actually had flat brainwaves documented, who come back saying, not only was I thinking, but I was thinking more clearly than I ever had before. But we also have other examples of cases in which, when the brain is compromised, people think more clearly. There are exceptional cases of people who have irreversible dementia or severe mental illness, who in their dying moments before they die become perfectly lucid. They start recognizing family members, they start talking coherently, they lose their delusions, and then they die. What is that all about? We don't have a materialistic explanation for this. If you assume that mind and brain can separate when the brain starts to deteriorate, then you have an explanation. You can't do a lot of research on that type of experience. Those are just isolated anecdotes, and believe me, they are unusual. Most people who die with dementia die with dementia. They don't come out of it. But we have these isolated cases that tell us something else is going on. But with the near-death experience, we have a potentially researchable lab to look at what's happening when the brain goes down. Now, we have ways of extending the life of the brain, for example, by hypothermia, by giving it different drugs to reduce its need for oxygen so it can keep going for longer. And you can argue about how dead is dead. But as Sam Parney mentioned this morning, if you get down to the point where you have an isolated neuron, an isolated nerve cell still functioning, does it make sense to say that neuron is hungry or is angry or has consciousness? We don't think so. How about if you have two cells connected together? Can they be hungry? Most neuroscientists think you need an entire intact neural network to have anything like consciousness. And clearly that is not going on when you have perhaps some rudimentary brain activity in the deep brainstem. Whatever you have, if you have any brain activity, it's not what we usually think is required for consciousness. So we have brains that are not functioning well enough to produce consciousness, and yet we have people saying, I was conscious throughout the whole procedure. In fact, I was more clear then than when I'm stuck back here in the brain with all the limitations of the brain on me. Is there anything that's verifiable in all this? We have people saying to us, yes, I was thinking clearer than ever before, that was more real than this. How do we know that there's anything to any of this? Well, occasionally people bring back from a near-death experience some verifiable information. And this is the thing that Sam is trying to do with this AWARE study, trying to put targets that are...
Do you believe in life after death? One man says he has scientific proof it is true. Dr. Jeffrey Long, a radiation oncologist from Louisiana, has written a book with his findings. He calls it Evidence of the Afterlife. Mary Jo Rapini says that she had a near-death experience that profoundly changed her life, and her story is featured in the doctor's book. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Doctor, if I can start with you. You collected more than 1,000 stories of near-death experiences from people all around the world, and you say the consistencies in those stories help prove scientifically that there is an afterlife. So based on your data, what is the proof?
Well, my research reveals 9 lines of evidence about the reality of near-death experiences and their consistent message of an afterlife.
Can you give me an example of some of those 9 lines of evidence?
Well, one good line of evidence is that those that are blind, including blind from birth, can have visual near-death experiences, not as fragments, but as fully visual impressions during their near-death experiences, just like visual impressions during other near-death experiences.
And no matter what the age of the person, it doesn't matter, the experience is the same, essentially?
My research involved a study of young children age 5 and under, and I found the content of their near-death experiences absolutely identical to older children and adults, suggesting that whether you know about near-death experiences, what your cultural upbringing is, what your awareness of death is, doesn't seem to have any effect on the content of the near-death experience.
Well,
Mary, to nearby Cedars-Sinai Medical Center.
And the paramedics put me on code red and blue right to Cedars-Sinai, where Dr. Lauren Hooten did brain surgery for an hour, 2 hours. He told me if I was 3 minutes late, it wouldn't be here. Wouldn't be live.
Suffered a very severe traumatic brain injury, as well as some bony fractures as well. He had a fracture of the back, the low back, and of the pelvis, but the most devastating injury was the brain injury.
And it was a real hard time. you know, and from then on it started the process of, well, your dad's not going to make it more than 72 hours, and if he does, he'll be a vegetable.
Probably 50% of people who have this kind of injury do die. Only 20% do well, and probably only 10% return to work the way he has.
Gary still has no memory of the 6 weeks he spent in the hospital. But he does remember crossing over to another reality.
You know, on the other side, there's no distance, time, or space. I could have been there for 3 days, 3,000 years, or 3 seconds. It's all the same.
Right after being released from the hospital, Busey insisted his views hadn't changed about helmet laws. But a year after facing death, Busey sang a different tune.
I have a 17-year-old son who's an expert motocross dirt bike rider. And he's made me very aware of helmets. From ages 16 to 21 or 25, they should be mandatory.
Busey suffered no brain damage from his head injuries, but he's still Hollywood's go-to guy for wild men and offbeat characters.
But the point in life is it's so precious, it's so short on earth, and it's so sweet. Good talking to you.
The greatest thing was being on stage and having the control, the awe of being worshipped, and having folks just really look at you and say, wow, you know, I want to be that.
As leader of a heavy metal band, Kirk Martin projected an angry, wild image on stage.
And getting just thousands of people to scream profanities, that was the biggest rush for me.
Offstage, people just found him mean.
I was so filled with hate that I would project that hate at a lot of people. Two of the band members, when we were on the road, just decided they were just sick of me and they couldn't take me anymore. And they actually decided to leave the band.
But the message in Kirk's music captured the minds of his young audience.
My whole intention was to tell people to believe in yourself, follow your own visions, your own dreams, and crush whoever's in your way.
Kirk had no illusions about where his growing success came from.
I got on the ground and I clawed the earth. I told Satan, I said, if you give me what I want, if you make me a god, if you give me the women and the drugs and the fame and everything, and you give me the power to crush people, I will serve you until the end of time. Within 2 days, I was offered a recording contract.
While Kirk pushed for fame and fortune, he tried to keep a secret bottled up inside.
A couple of older boys in the neighborhood started molesting me and sodomizing me when I was probably about 8. It happened more than once, and I never talked about it. I never told anybody about it.
Later, taking advantage of women sexually became part of Kirk's heavy metal lifestyle.
The worst part about my molestation was the fact that I, in turn, went out and violated others.
Then, just as he was about to sign the record deal for which he'd sold his soul, he had an encounter with a mysterious stranger.
One morning at about 9 o'clock, I went into a small cafe, and this guy came and sat down right across from me. Out of all the places he could have sat, there were plenty of seats open. And immediately I looked at him with this horrible, mean-looking look on my face, and I said, "What's happening, Dad?" And he stopped stirring his coffee again and looked at me right in the face, and he said, "What's happening, Dad?" I jumped across the table and I put my nose right up to his, stared him in the eye, and I just cursed him. I called him every foul thing I could think of. And he said, "God sent me here to tell you that he loves you. And God wants you to know that he was not responsible for the young men that molested you when you were a young child." And the thing that was so mind-blowing about that is he used their names.